Hi everyone, this is Steve Hess from OpenBOM and welcome.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, this is Steve Hess from OpenBOM. Welcome. Okay, thanks everyone. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. I see a few people are still joining. Okay. See if everyone can see my screen here. I had a little trouble earlier. Just 1 moment. Okay, terrific. Let's go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Steve Hess. I'm the Director of User Experience at OpenBOM, and I want to thank you all for joining today. I see some familiar names in the list and some new ones. So I'd like to, just before as we get started here, I'd like to point out that over on the right side of your GoToMeeting, there should be a little panel there that says questions. I believe it's a question mark. So feel free to type questions in there. I'll try to monitor that as we go. I am a one-man show here. So let's go ahead and get started. And welcome to today's webinar. Let's just cover a couple of basics. Let me back up. Today's webinar is about mastering SolidWorks BOMs in OpenBOM. So that's a really big topic, and I'll show you in just a minute how I've broken that down. Here's some basics. Everyone's muted. You can send questions if the question panel doesn't work for you. You can send them to support@openbom.com, and we'll share both this the slide deck and the video. And finally, this is meant to be a casual event and to maximize the use of our time. So we're really going to try to keep this at 30 minutes-ish. Might run a little bit longer on this one, but generally going to be 30 minutes. So what are some of the things we're going to cover? I discovered last night as I was putting this together that there's just a lot of information for 30 minutes. So I broke this down into what we're going to call some of our webinar episodes. Today's episode, we're going to cover the process of sort of new BOMs, settings, properties, updating BOMs, that kind of thing. We're going to go through the process from the perspective of sort of a new creating new BOMs. In the next couple of webinars, we'll cover some of these other topics about part classification, bidirectional settings, and maintenance, ongoing maintenance of bills of materials. So I will make those announcements as time goes on. But today, webinar 24 will be mostly about new BOMs and settings, properties, etc. So in particular, what we're going to be covering today is literally in 3 minutes. Once we get started, in 3 minutes, we're going to create a new BOM. We're going to talk about how do properties get from SolidWorks into OpenBOM and which ones we get in there and which ones we don't, or ones we might not want. We'll talk about how do we make changes in SolidWorks and bring those changes into my OpenBOM. We'll look around some of the OpenBOM settings. It's really actually quite simple. And we'll discuss a little bit about part classifications by catalogs. In other words, I've got a part that's in my general catalog, but it's really a fastener, and I really want to have it in my catalog of fasteners. And then we'll wrap up kind of with some do's and don'ts, and then we'll wrap it up and keep going next week. So here's a few definitions. I'm going to let you read through this. Most everyone I think is familiar with this, what multi-level, single-level BOMs are, add-ins, etc. And these are the basics of OpenBOM for SolidWorks. So this is where we kind of want to get started. I just want to set some ground rules here. OpenBOM for SolidWorks requires an add-in. So there's an add-in which you download from our integrations page and install it. And that's how we get data from SolidWorks into OpenBOM and back to SolidWorks. BOMs are created for SolidWorks assemblies only, or things that look and feel like assemblies, weldments and other things. We're going to deal with that in a later webinar, and there's actually some videos online about how those behave. Individual parts may be saved into OpenBOM using the save item command. We're going to look at that today. It's how we individually save parts from SolidWorks into OpenBOM. The OpenBOM for SolidWorks requires a license, a free trial, professional user, etc. There's more details on our website, or you can be part of a team or a company account that your administrator has added you to. We usually like SolidWorks 2016 or later, although some functionality works with earlier. We also have integrations for PDM and Windows File Explorer. We're not going to cover those today, as well as folder upload in Excel and other CAN formats, which we're also not going to cover today. So in today's webinar, we're going to go through 5 individual lessons, and they are, as we discussed, quickly creating a BOM for SolidWorks, taking an assessment of what just happened, dealing with properties, adding some properties, things to watch out for, settings that are important in both SolidWorks and OpenBOM, and then finally, saving that part into a new catalog. So this is where we're going to start lesson number 1. I'm going to jump over to SolidWorks real quick. Keep in mind that this deck will be shared out with you, so you'll have exactly these same details. So with that, I'm going to fire up SolidWorks and get started. If there's any questions or anything, please post them in GoToMe. Okay. So many of you have maybe seen this SolidWorks, this wireless router. I like this for a number of different reasons. It's a good sample. So let's assume for a moment that I have SolidWorks design. I'm relatively new to OpenBOM. I've installed the add-in, and you can see here that and there's a video on how to cover that. There's a link in the slide deck on installing it. So I've fired up SolidWorks. I've got the add-in installed. I go to my settings and I just type in my username and password and click OK. And I click the BOM button. I'm going to see this dialog that gives me some information. I always encourage you to read these because they really do tell you that what's going to happen. We're going to save some parts into a catalog classification called SolidWorks items, and we're going to create the following multi-level bill of material called wireless router W24. Okay, let's do that. The integration pulls out the data. You may see a panel like that describes kind of what's going on, what files are being transferred. And let's open the bill of material. But I would say that's probably a minute or less, and we've created a bill of material in OpenBOM. I'll resize this so maybe it looks a little better on the screen. Okay, here we go. This is a multi-level bill of material. Picked up all of my structure. A variety of different pieces of metadata came across. We're going to dive into what those are and how they got there. So that's it. But I quickly notice, I like to have text wrap turned on. I quickly notice that my router base, for some reason, doesn't have a description. So let's go back to our router base. Open that part in SolidWorks. Jump over here. We're going to add something called. We're going to add a property called description, and this is my wireless router base. I'm going to use a button here called, I'm in the part right now, so I'm going to use a button here called save item, and save that to my SolidWorks items. And you ignore the dash numbers right now. We have these for serialization, and I think we'll be removing them. So let's go ahead and update that back to OpenBOM. And I'm going to jump over here to my bill of materials, and this is a browser, so I'm going to reload my browser. And I see the WR base that came across. So in just a few minutes, we created a bill of material. We recognized a couple of key, that a key piece of metadata was missing. We jumped back to Solidworks, made a change, and brought it over. Okay, so this thing's starting to look pretty good. It looks like I've got descriptions for all the other parts that are in my assembly, and my BOM follows my product structure and all that. So that's, and really for many of you, that's gonna work just fine. You can stop right here, you can share this, you can do other things, you can add costs and start doing BOM and production planning with this. So, but we want to dive a little bit more. This webinar is about, SolidWorks. So I want to dive in a little bit deeper and see, sort of what happened. So, so let's do that. Let's take a look at what, we got a series of properties that came into our bill of material, and file name and type, and configuration name, and all these things across the top. The reason that these properties came into OpenBOM was because they had some value set in one of the parts in my assembly. So for example, I brought over some license information, about demo tools, because there's a PCB embedded in this thing. So as I browse around, I can see that, look, one of these things turned out my router top. One of these had some metadata in a property called demo tools. So we brought that across, and likewise with these other settings. So this might be a good time to jump over here and take a peek at the properties that are actually in our assembly. We do that by opening up the OpenBOM settings and creating a new template for properties. So we can see that there's an awful lot of other properties that are in our assembly structure, many of which did not come across because they didn't have any values in them. So, so if I wanted some of those to come across, or if I wanted to organize them, if I wanted them to be in a certain order or something, I can start using these settings here, putting some properties over here, moving them around, and so on. We're going to cover that in our next webinar, but I want to point out here that even though there are, this is the aggregate of all the properties that are in all of the parts in our assembly, we didn't bring all of those properties over to OpenBOM because many of them were empty. So that's how we try to keep your BOM just with the meaningful information. So, okay, let's take a look at a couple of other things that are of note here. So there is a circuit board in here that's in our circuit board assembly, which is actually an assembly, it's a type assembly, but we didn't bring any structure over for that. Also, there's something else here. There's an aerial antenna that's likewise, it's an assembly inside Solidworks, but I'm not bringing any of the structure across with me. The reason for that is because I flagged that as a purchase assembly inside Solidworks, and OpenBOM respects that. So here's a board. I'm buying that board. I don't want every resistor and everything else showing up in my BOM. Likewise with this antenna, well, maybe I modeled all the individual bits and pieces so that I can do mass calculations or other types of calculations. I'm buying that antenna aerial as a single item. So how did that happen? Why were other things that were called assemblies, why did they come over with structure and those two assemblies did not? Well, here's how. Let's take a look at aerial right here. Here's that aerial assembly. You see it has several parts in it, all of these, but these did not come over to OpenBOM. Why not? Let's find out why. The reason they did not come over to OpenBOM is because I told Solidworks using the configuration properties dialog to hide them. So this is a very important dialogue in with respect to how parts come over to OpenBOM. So take a look at your configuration, right mouse properties on there. If this thing is set to hide, we're not going to bring the those subcomponents over. And there's some other settings here as well. Show is the default. Promote would be in the case if I was doing something with a phantom assembly, in other words, assembly that existed just for maybe organization, but I didn't want that assembly to actually be shown in my BOM. I would set it to promote, which does exactly the opposite. It lifts all the parts that are in a lower level up one level. And again, we'll cover promote a little bit more in another webinar. But hide, this is a purchased assembly. I'm buying an antenna as a single item, but I've modeled them all in SolidWorks, set it to hide, and it will show up in my bill of material as a single line item. It's still a type assembly, but it won't have any structure underneath it. Okay, and so the next thing I want to dive into is part number. And part number is really, we're going to spend a few minutes on this because the value for part number it needs to be, we need to think this through. There's a number of different ways the part number can be brought over to SolidWorks. And the most common method, let's take a look at router base. The most common method is file name. So let's take a look at our router base here. Here it is. Router base is has a file name of router base, okay? And its part number is router base. Okay, that works pretty well in most cases. If you're just starting out and you put part number in file name, you know, SolidWorks will keep it from being, won't let you have two files with the same name, at least open at the same time. That's a nice way to start transferring part number over to OpenBOM. But we quickly find out that we run into a little bit of trouble with that, and not the least of which is the file name becomes a little bit unreadable. So what are some of our other options? Okay, so let's take a look at, let's go open up something else. Let's go look at this screw that's in our top level assembly. And this screw has a file name of 08011. Okay. But we see that it's coming through as 08011-ZZ with its part number. And the reason for that is that there is a property, a custom property called part number, and it is set to ZZ, to -ZZ. So that is configuration specific. If I had multiple configurations in here, each configuration should have its own part number. As we know, custom actually applies to the whole file. I want to point out that there can also be a part number in custom, but in the event that there is a part number in configuration specific, this is the one that will be used. So there's an order of precedent. You'll see this a little bit better when I share the slide deck with you. Actually, let me jump over here to the slide deck. Let's take a look. This is the order of precedence that is used when we are determining part number. First and foremost, we use file name for part number. If a configuration exists, a configuration setting exists, we will use that. I'll show you that in just a second. If a part number in custom property exists, we will use that. And then finally, if a configuration specific part number exists, we'll use that. So let's take a little bit deeper dive. Let's go through part number one more time. So returning back here, let's take a look at let's use our screw again as an example. We've got a file name here, 08011. That's not in our BOM. We have a setting in our properties that says use this part number, but that's not appearing in our BOM. We have a setting in custom that says use this part number, that's the -Z, but that one's not appearing in our BOM. And then finally, we have a configuration specific one, and that's what is appearing in our BOM. So there is this order of precedence. We take first configuration if it exists. If it doesn't, we'll take custom. If that doesn't exist, we will take the value in properties for that configuration where it says which one, what part number to use. And then finally, if none of the three of those things exist, we'll use file name. So there's a little more documentation on this. There's some videos. I just encourage you to just spend a little time kind of playing around with that and take a look at this. Take a look at this slide deck in the webinar deck, and you'll see that there's an example that we just gave. It's the exact one where we had file name, we had configuration, we had custom, and then finally we had configuration specific, and that's what was used. So file names are important. Part numbers are really important. Really important that you don't do something where you can create duplicate part numbers. So, okay. That was kind of a long version of number 2. I really want to be sensitive to the time. So let's jump back over to our third lesson. I think I covered this a little bit. We're going to take a look again at this screw. And let me do a little cleanup here. Okay. So let's take a look at this screw, and we've got our part number, we've got some other information. We just realized, hey, you know what? That screw really needed I really meant to have a finish on that. So this one's going to be zinc plated. I really wanted to have a finish. How can I do that and drive that down from SolidWorks? So we've got the screw open. Let's jump over here to custom settings, and we're going to set something here to finish, and we'll set that to zinc. Okay. We're going to use, since we just made a change to this part, we want to save this item back to OpenBOM. We're going to save it into our SolidWorks items. Update that. Very good. And we can either click the link or reload our browser. And you see we ended up with, we now have finish. And in the next webinar, I'll go into more detail about using templates to specify the order of all these properties, make it a little easier to manage. But so that's how we did that. We just changed that to, we added finish and it showed up. And of course we could go edit that value to be something else. That could be, maybe we make that tab plated and save it, and we just simply do another save item. So that's the process for individually making changes to parts individually and saving them. Now watch this setting over here, saving them back to OpenBOM. And now we see it's calculated, poorly spelled. Okay, all right, so okay, let's move on from that and take a look at kind of some key OpenBOM settings and some key SolidWorks settings that affect how BOMs get built. So I'm going to close that for the moment and go to my OpenBOM settings. So we've already visited this. We've seen that we did, most of the information you need to know here is just, sign in, username, password. There's a few choices here on what types of BOMs to build. There's documentation on all this. Parts list is literally a flat list. Single level is just the top level, and multi-level is the full BOM structure. I generally work in multi-level and use the setting inside of OpenBOM to switch to the various types. So a couple of key settings that you'll want to know about are both the BOM and catalog properties. These are filters that we created. We took a quick peek at this just a minute ago. You can create a filter. This here. We can create a filter that includes or excludes certain certain properties. And like I said, the default behavior is that OpenBOM will just pick up the ones that have some value in them. But if you wanted to include some other ones, you can go ahead and add those here. You can move these up and down here, but keep in mind there's a number of contributing factors that dictate what order the columns are in your BOM. I cover that again, I think, more in the next webinar. And the most useful way to really control that is to use something called templates. I'm not going to cover that right now, but if I did create a template, that template could have the order prescribed in there, and the order of the columns would be exactly as it is in the template. We're going to cover that in this webinar. And then finally, the other thing that you need to be interested in is something called default catalog. This is the default classification for items, for parts and assemblies. So when we start keeping all the parts and assembly items in OpenBOM, we're going to store them in this thing called Solidworks items. So in just a moment, we're going to take a look at, well, gee, what if I wanted to have Solidworks items, and then I wanted to have a different classification called fasteners, maybe, that were just for my fasteners and all. We're going to cover that in just a second on how to save one of those parts that defaults into Solidworks items. How do I save it over to fasteners? So, okay, so here, that's the OpenBOM settings dialog. That's pretty simple. A little bit different story in Solidworks. There's quite a number of settings that are in different places that affect how bills of material get built. And I'm going to cover these quickly because I want to keep an eye on the time here. But let's take a look at the screw to start. Let's just take a look at the properties. I'm at the top level. So there's a couple of settings down here: envelope and exclude from bill of material. There's more documentation on those, but if you set something to envelope, we will put it in the BOM, but ignore its children. And of course, if you set something to exclude from bill of material, we will ignore it in the bill of material. Also, anything that is suppressed or lightweight will be ignored when we build the BOM. So if you have an assembly that's set to lightweight, you have a large assembly that loads everything, defaults in lightweight, be aware the lightweight or suppressed will not show up in the BOM. So that's always something to look for. I usually go to the top, set it to resolve, build the BOM. So configuration properties, we looked at that a little bit, but let's go take a look at that with a little more detail here. I'm going to open up the screw, and we're going to go to the configuration properties dialog. And there's a few things in here that are important. This is a bad example. Let me grab the assembly. Let's go with the router base. Configuration properties. Okay. So the two key areas in here are this setting that says where to get part number for bills of material. This is the default behavior that we use when we're getting part number from file name. So if you said, hey, look, this is my part, it's called router base W24. I want that to be the part number, and I want you to get it from document name. Okay, great. There's also a few other settings here: configuration name or user specified name. So you could sort of start overriding some of those settings here for part number. And you may have seen in the screw example, we had some other value typed in there. Keep in mind that order of precedent with file name, configuration setting, custom property, configuration specific custom property. Those are still in play here. So as you fool around with these things a little bit, you'll kind of start to see how they contribute. In my experience, if you are using just default configuration, you don't have any other configurations, and you don't want to use file name as the part number, for example, I'd like this to be something else, this is a pretty good place to put part number. It will apply to all configurations, be aware, so the minute you add a second configuration, we'll have the same part number, you might get into trouble there. But if you're not using configurations, this is a great place to store part number. And then finally, I would just say, use some of your assemblies, create some BOMs, kind of fool around with these settings. And then here again, this is where we discussed whether we're going to hide show lower level components. Again, we were in manufacturing, we refer to this as the purchased assembly. If this is an assembly and you want to, like our aerial, we don't want to show any of the lower level parts in the BOM. You're going to use hide. Okay. Okay, and finally, I want to jump to our last lesson here, which is updating a specific item to a specific catalog or classification using save item. So once again, I'm going to return back to, go open up the screw, and we're going to add one more. I'm going to add one more property called head type, and I'm going to call this pan head. Okay. So I'm starting to get kind of some information about this fastener. It's starting to kind of get more mature. Maybe it's time for me to start creating a catalog of just fasteners, because the head configuration property might not be meaningful in the context of other parts, molded parts, and things like that. So this is a good example, isn't it? Clearly might want to have its own classification or what we call a catalog. So the way that we do that is we use the save item command, and we're going to say, look, we're going to grab, right now we want to put this in Solidworks items. And this is the work we've been doing throughout this webinar. But I want to put this somewhere else. And I have another catalog called fasteners, and I created this ahead of time in OpenBOM from the dashboard. But I'm going to go ahead and save this to fasteners instead of the location where OpenBOM found it. I'm going to save it over here to fasteners. Okay. We'll see a message that fasteners was updated. Let's go open our fasteners catalog and take a look at that. So what we see now is we have the screw again, even with the same part number, is now in our fasteners catalog, and it has the additional property called head type, and we see it here set as pan head. But now I've got a little bit of a conundrum. I have this -ZZ in both my fasteners catalog, and we'll jump back and we remember we had it also in our Solidworks items catalog. So the solution is really very simple. I simply find the screw here. Yeah, I like working with text strap on. I find the screw here. This one does not have the head type property because I'd saved it as a new classification fastener. I'm just going to delete that. And then we're going to go ahead and return back over here to our bill of material. And the first thing we notice is, wow, I don't have any information for that screw anymore because I deleted it from the catalog that is being used on this BOM. I simply come back here, add fasteners back in, OpenBOM finds the new fastener in the new catalog, brings it in, has the head type configuration, has the correct part number, and all the information that we need. So what we did there was we used the save item command to save this guy out to a new catalog. And I won't do it now because I don't want to change it. And once we did that, we opened the new catalog, understood that it was there, saw the new property types, etc. Went to the old catalog, deleted it, went to the BOM and reconnected the new catalog, and we'll bring the parts in. That's not something that you do very, very often. Generally you have these sort of classifications and catalogs to find it, ahead of time. But when you're getting started, you're thinking about, gee, where do I put, sheet metal or fasteners or molded parts or fans or circuit boards, or however you break up your your product into commodities and catalogs. Once you have that sort of thought out, this won't change very much. But okay, that's I do want to be sensitive to the time. Let's jump back to our webinar presentation here and just sort of wrap this up. again, you'll have this. I want to cover a few do's and don'ts. Now you're thinking a little bit more about this. Always use unique part numbers. We discussed it a little bit. I want to point out a certain case that Solidworks lets you do, but you're going to run into it's a bad practice, and that's the simple example of the door assembly. You've got a door assembly that contains a part called door, and if you're using the setting that says, hey, get part number from file name, you're going to end up with two things with part number door. So if you find yourself in that situation, you're going to end up with something we have a loop that is created here, and you're going to run into a logical problem. In other words, I have door calling door calling door. So what do you do there? You use one of the methods we described and put part number either in configuration or custom or specific settings in SolidWorks. So just watch out if you're using a file name as part number, you can get yourself into this situation and create a loop. And we'll notify you of that if we discover those in OpenBOM. Do be mindful of the default catalog. We saw that in the OpenBOM settings. Default catalog is where your parts are going to go when you create a BOM. So I recommend you use SolidWorks items, especially if you're new to OpenBOM, and then sort of expand as we did in the example with fasteners. Read the messages, the messages that come up. We try to keep them brief, but they do have some information about what is going to happen and make sure that that's what you expect. Use the BOM and save item commands. The BOM is great for creating that first BOM and introducing it to OpenBOM. Save items is good for updating individual items as changes occur. I'm going to discourage you from using the catalog command. We're in the process of deprecating that in place of the new bill of material command. And finally, don't create multiple configurations with the same part number. Again, we're going to cover that, I think, in a week or two. But you'll end up with this situation up here where you have a loop of part numbers calling the same part numbers. So I like the configuration specific part number instead. So be careful, like we discussed, if you're using this setting over here that says, hey, I want everything in my file to have a particular part number, just be careful that that applies to all configurations as well. So, okay, here are some references. There's a terrific video that deals with first 3 minutes of SolidWorks, so in downloading, installing the add-in, etc. Something I always like to encourage people to take a look at is just more about multi-level BOMs. There's great information in there. Our library, our learning library of webinars and basics and help are on these links right here. It's a great place to start. There's some definitions about what's going on with OpenBOM kind of behind the scenes, the relationships and hierarchy and things like that you guys might find useful. So, and finally, reach out to us at support@openbom.com or use the feature right here within OpenBOM to create a ticket, and you can use things. You can mark up the screen and do things here, black things out if there's some private information or whatnot, and fill this out, hit send. This will go to directly to our support team. That is the best way to get support, better than email. We read support as a first priority. So okay, that's it for me. I want to thank you all for attending, and watch out for the upcoming webinars, and we'll be sharing this out to you as well. So I hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye. Oh, hang on, let me just check. If I've got a couple of questions. I will answer them in the support channel. Thanks you guys. I know because we're running a little bit long here, but okay. Thanks everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.